Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about a interesting project. It's not a toy. It's actually in implementation right now, and in fact, it's actually deployed right now for the floodings that are happening in East North Carolina because of the recent Hurricane Matthew. So, as mentioned, I am James Conrad, and I'm going to talk about, first of all, the MOVE vehicle and the project associated with it. The second talk is the technical details, specifically about what is inside the truck, in a lot more specific terms than what I'm going to cover in the first part. So maybe I should give you a little bit of background, and maybe I will have this work. All right, let's see how this goes. And maybe I wouldn't even worry about that. So going on. So here's the motivation. Why should you sit here and listen to this talk, other than the fact that you may have another session later on? Well, the first reason is because we have documented the steps that you would need to follow to be able to replicate this in your area, with your section, with your chapter, and your region, whatever. This is a great vehicle, yes, pun intended, or a mechanism or a process to be able to involve a lot of members in your area. For example, we have many volunteers from across Region 3, that's the Southeast U.S., and Region 5, that's the region from Louisiana, Arkansas, over quite a ways through Texas and further up north as well. And because of our activity, we've involved a lot of different people and actually have attracted members who ordinarily would not have done anything like this. Still doesn't work, so we'll just go on. So, IEEE MOVE is a disaster relief, public visibility, and STEM outreach effort. This effort is not only a truck, but more importantly is the people who actually work driving the truck and operate all of the equipment and facilities associated with the truck. Let me see if that one works.
Yeah, there's Butch.
There you go. You must recognize Butch from his head. And I just said that on film, didn't I? So, what is the functionality of the vehicle itself? It is obviously mobile transportation. It is obviously a office space. We're able to sit in there, use tables, do work. It is also a communications, a mobile communications vehicle, and it's also a mobile power supply. It actually has a generator on board that we can actually run the vehicle for days and days and days and days without plugging into power anywhere else. So in a nutshell, we established this for disaster survivors who obviously survive the initial catastrophe, but often find themselves in need of communications like power. And again, this is just the IEEE-ish type things. The fact that we're helping with communications and energy doesn't necessarily mean that other things are not important, like sanitation and water and such. But we're actually using our expertise specifically in the areas that many IEEE members are comfortable with. We're not like some of the first responders. In other words, we're not supposed to be there to show up and offer direct support as soon as something happens, or for that matter, even before. Although I'll change that discussion a little bit later. But we're helping the disaster volunteers and survivors with the types of supplies or the types of services that the normal infrastructure would ordinarily provide, but is not available because of the disaster. Let me give you a good example. Right now in eastern North Carolina, I've been told by some people who work for Duke Energy, there are power substations still underwater. The water crested in the Lumber River on Friday, no, today. And so there are many resources that literally, because the power substation is underwater, there's no way you could run it. And so there are different services that different organizations need. For example, the Red Cross needs communications and obviously power to be able to do their systems, work with people who are affected by these. And it's amazing, especially here in the US, how much we rely on communications. And I'm going to go a little bit over that later. So the goals, again, communications, energy, light, and information to disaster survivors. Now, initially I will say that we wanted to do something, and we're finding that our role is more beneficial in another area. And I'll just mention it right now. We thought we would be working directly with survivors, and we're finding that it's really hard to do that. And in fact, we're not really trained to do that well. But there are people like the Red Cross who are trained to do that. And so we're finding that our best value add is actually helping those Red Cross volunteers who've been trained to work directly with the victims, to go out and travel that they do. And we are actually finding that the Red Cross really appreciates our ability to help them do their jobs better, because we provide a solution for energy, for communications. But we're also looking to build a trained volunteer community, because this is just one vehicle. But there are different things that we can do. And I'll talk all that all the way at the end when we talk about the different types of solutions that we could provide. So first, the validation for what we wanted to do. We wanted to do something that would help with disasters, and so we asked people who had been through it. I don't know if many of you are aware, IEEE is headquartered in New Jersey, northern New Jersey in particular. Many of them were affected by Superstorm Sandy. And so we had a couple of sessions where we sat down with IEEE staff members who had been through the disasters and were able to tell us what they thought they needed. And this is how we first identified what our problem solution would be, is basing on this one single focus group of disaster Superstorm Sandy. We found out later that most disasters haven't even fit this profile. And their problem is that people stayed in their homes weren't terribly damaged, but they had no power for 10 to 20 days, 10 to 12, but some of them set up to 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And they were worried because there was no power whatsoever. It was really dark, and they didn't get any information because the cell phone was the only connection to the outside world. Sometimes it was spotty, and when they lost power in their cell phone, that was it. There's no way to charge it. And to them, that was rather unnerving. Do we have a clicker that works now?
Yes.
Oh, apparently yes. Yay. I assume I hit the buttons, right? So what we also did is we examined what other people do. How many of you are familiar with the Cisco Tactical Ops Group? No? Cisco has an absolute wonderful organization, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. And what they will do is they have, well, that looks pretty familiar, right? A vehicle that looks like that. They also have another one that looks like this with a huge mass. That's amazing. And they go around to natural disasters and they provide communications support for emergency organizations. So their goal is not really to help the survivors, the people firsthand. FEMA, of course, has their own vehicles. And as we found later, we actually helped FEMA in several situations because sometimes they don't really know how to use their own equipment. And there's also the Amateur Radio Emergency Services group, ARES, that does ham communications. And we didn't want to duplicate what they did because they do a very good job. I should also mention that Red Cross used to have vehicles kind of similar to what we have, but they got rid of them because they were hard to maintain and hard to operate. They just didn't have the expertise. IEEE does. And so we identified some operational requirements, specifically from all the what everybody else has done. Cellular charging for survivors, communications of information. We intended on putting TVs outside the vehicle so that people could stand there and watch outside the vehicle, maybe get Weather Channel, Direct TV, CNN, etc., so they could find out more of what's going on. And then the display of other information, handing out where supplies might be, and hotspot for internet. So the requirements that we said to do this is onboard generator, solar panels, internet access, run on its own power source, which is the onboard generator, and then have rechargeable battery packs that we can hand out, and then also display TV stations. I participated in the Baton Rouge flooding disaster recovery, and I was amazed at how much information that the local TV stations were able to distribute. However, a lot of the people who needed that weren't getting it because they didn't have homes. Their homes were flooded out, there was no power there, they were in shelters, and the shelters weren't playing those stations. Other thing, the requirements of not is, first of all, sassy daughters are not allowed to drive the truck. The vehicle, we determined, would not have toilet facilities, sleeping facilities, water or sewer, because we didn't want people to want to have to use it, and we didn't want to have to maintain it, or for that matter, smell it. And we chose not to have amateur radio capacity, and that it would not be a commercial vehicle that you needed a commercial driver's license for. I am one of the quote-unquote trained drivers of this vehicle. I have had a training course for a day, and the vehicle fully loaded with what we have in it is about 23,000 pounds. Yes, question?
Why not have amateur radio in the truck, or what kind of comms do you have in the truck?
Well, first of all, the question was, why not have amateur radio in it? And our conscious decision was to not have it because it would be duplicating what somebody else has, and the fact that hardly any of us who are the volunteers actually have a ham license. And for example, I don't have a ham license. I just never had the opportunity or the need to do it. So we do have lots of other communications equipment, which I'll talk about briefly here, and then a lot more in talk number 2. So we have volunteer training. Interesting enough, there is specific training on disaster response for disaster response volunteers. The Red Cross even has one, this is scary, interacting with disaster survivors. Unfortunately, when I deployed, I didn't have that training first. So here I am talking with people who've lost everything, and I don't really know how to respond. But it's amazing how grateful they were that you were there helping them out in some way. But the intent was that we wouldn't be running this thing all the time for disasters. We intended to do one disaster a year. You know how many we've done so far? 4. Just disasters alone. So we're out there a lot more disasters than what we figured we would do, which is STEM outreach. And since it's an interesting vehicle, pun intended again, for how to reach kids, this is a great way to reach out to them and show them actually hands-on things. So we partner with the Red Cross, and the advantage of that is we sleep in their shelters. They have different shelters for victims as they do for volunteers. We eat their food. They actually also provide transportation. For example, when I deployed to Baton Rouge, I had to get back to teach courses. They paid for my plane ticket back, even though I drove the truck out there. The truck stayed for a couple more days. They also help us with additional fuel if we can't find it ourselves, or for hooking up to shore power. So, of the activities that we've done, we've actually taken this and it's served as a headquarters in eastern North Carolina for their fire preparedness campaign, which is basically smoke alarm installation. And then 4 times we've had volunteer training in those cities that you see there. We actually had another 1 or 2 training sessions canceled because the vehicle was deployed. Kind of hard to train the vehicle when it's like 500 miles away in a swamp. So, and we've done quite a bit of STEM and public visibility. We've had institute articles. We've actually been asked to have an article for the HKN Bridge magazine, and I'm going to be talking about it in the IEEE Foundation's annual report. So our deployments have been 2015 to, I think it was Tropical Storm Hermine. Was that the one that just kind of went through really quick in the East Coast? And right now, we don't know how long we'll be deployed for Matthew. One thing I did discover is Anheuser-Busch. Everybody, did you know that they make cans of water for disaster? If you ask me offline when I'm not recorded, I'll tell you exactly what people say they taste like. But it's amazing, they can ruin beer and ruin water too. All right, so I did say that online, didn't I? So our reaction from Red Cross volunteers has been fantastic. They love what we do, we help them out, and more importantly, IEEE people have the expertise in communications and power to be able to do what they need to be done. So here's where I send the pitch. You can donate $10 monthly recurring donations. And I think they were also posting that if you donate $10, you'll get a thumb drive with a lot of stuff on it. Is that right, Eric? I saw that running in the slide deck, right?
Yes.
Okay, so feel free to do that. We are on Facebook. So as you can imagine, Facebook is the wonderful thing that everybody knows how to do, right? So on Facebook, we actually put our updates of what we've done this day, where we are, what has been successful or not successful. For example, right now they're at Fort Bragg in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and we're providing internet access for a Red Cross district office, which is then working with people who go out into the field. And that's another example. Unfortunately, these guys are sleeping in the truck, which is not necessarily a bad thing because the truck is air conditioned. So I would recommend you go ahead and look at that. The other is that you can also view, we have, if you go to move.IEEEUSA.org, that is our main launching place for donations and for everything else. Go ahead and go out there and look at it. That is about it. Mary Ellen Randall, the former Region 3 director, is the one who is mostly the brainchild and is really driving this. Unfortunately, it seems like the one volunteer who is most able to help is her husband, Grayson, so she's always sending him out and doing all these deployments. So I think he's been at every single one. And again, more information, move IEEE USA. You know, I'll take a couple of questions about the general nature of this before I get into the second talk. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is more a comment than a question. At the last flooding, we recognized that it's really helped to organize the help of the volunteers by Facebook and social media. And so we were able to relocate many volunteers in a short time by Facebook and Twitter, etc. And this might be in